Good evening, everyone. I haven't done that in a long time. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the regular business meeting for the District of Squamish for Tuesday, January 18th. Hatsqualowin, Wistaluktamuk, Latskahomish, Okameo. We are privileged to be gathering tonight on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Council motion to adopt the agenda. Moved by Council French, seconded by Council Anderson. Any opposed? Motion carries. Any no's motion? Seeing none, we do not have any delegations or proclamations this evening. Consideration of unscheduled public attendance. This is anyone attending from the public who feels they have an issue that can't wait until the next regular meeting 2 weeks from now. Seeing no hands, we'll move on to item 8A1, District of Squamish zoning bylaw. This is stage 3 general amendments, amendment bylaw number 2824, 2021. And I'm handing things over to Mr. Daly.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Brian Daly, Development and Subdivision Coordinator with Community Planning. I'm here tonight to present the Stage 3 general amendments of the 2020 zoning bylaw update for consideration of first and second reading. At the June 8th, 2021 Committee of the Whole meeting, Council provided the following feedback regarding the Stage 3 amendments. Examine gross floor area and height exemptions for passive house or mass timber buildings. Ensure Class B bicycle parking regulations are included, including a provision requiring covered bicycle parking for Class B spaces. Revisit the definition of gasoline fueling station. Review older CD zones and bring them in line with more recently adopted zones if possible. And examine the possibility of requiring storage space for residents in new developments. Staff believe the feedback provided by Council has been sufficiently addressed and the bylaws are being brought forward for consideration of first and second reading. Stage 3 of the zoning bylaw update is intended to address a broad range of issues under the categories of increasing zoning bylaw flexibility, improving functionality, and addressing gaps. The original intention was for bylaw 2824 to repeal and replace zoning bylaw 2200-2011. Given the number of ongoing zoning bylaw amendment projects, including rezoning applications working to meet conditions prior to adoption, the Stage 3 amendments are now amending zoning bylaw 2200-2011 to leave the original bylaw number in place. Any ongoing amendments would need to go back to second reading to reference the new zoning bylaw number if it was completed prior to that amendment being adopted. In some cases, this may require an additional public hearing. Staff have included additional amendments to address Council's comments and concerns raised by members of the public during the public engagement process. Staff have increased the amount of exterior cladding and wall system thickness that can be excluded from gross floor area from 0.165 meters to 0.3 meters, provided it meets an effective R value of 40 or higher as confirmed by a certified energy advisor. A height exemption for commercial, industrial, mixed use, and residential buildings to exceed the maximum height in the applicable zone by 0.15 meters has been included, provided the roof contains at least 0.35 meters of insulation. Staff have defined mass timber building and added a height exemption for mass timber buildings to exceed the maximum height in the applicable zone by 0.3 meters per story. Solar panels were added to the list of items that are exempted from height requirements. Class B bicycle parking regulations are included in section 41.9C. A requirement for covered Class B bicycle parking spaces has been included. The definition of vehicle fueling station was revisited to clarify that both liquid and alternative fuel service for hybrid and electric vehicles may be provided. The previous version of the definition stated that both options must be provided. Zones CD1 and CD25 have been deleted as there are no longer properties with this zoning within the District of Squamish. Undertaking review of all older CD zones could be done through a new review project, as the amount of work to review each property, the existing legal agreements, and determine what would be appropriate zoning for each property would be a substantial work project. Storage space requirements for residents in new developments is not recommended at this time. Staff were unable to find examples of local governments in BC with similar type of requirements. Given the number of amendments already included in phase 3 and the potential impact of additional storage space requirements could have on the design of new developments, staff recommend that a separate zoning bylaw amendment requiring storage space for residents in new developments be brought forward to allow for additional research and targeted engagement on the specific topic. Additional amendments include language was added to the definition of balcony and deck to allow for retractable weather protection. Language was added to the definition of accessory building to clarify that an accessory dwelling unit is not considered an accessory building, to confirm it is subject to its own regulations in section 4.38. And to revise the definition of accessory retail sales was revised to include language specifying that if there is accessory retail sales associated with warehousing of goods related to home improvement, it is considered a building supply outlet. Language was also added to the definition of building supply outlet to speak to showrooms. This is intended to further clarify the difference between building supply outlet and light industrial use intending to warehouse products and sell them on site. The additional clarity is required as recently there have been a number of building supply retailers trying to fit into the warehousing definition in the business park. A project page for the Stage 3 general amendments was posted on the district website. 2 open house events were held in mid-September, 1 in person and 1 online. Invitations were emailed to the development community and other professionals who regularly work with the zoning bylaw, and the events were advertised in the Squamish Chief newspaper. Approximately 10 people attended the in-person open house and 2 people attended the online open house. Attendees were generally supportive of the proposed general amendments. Staff recommend that Bylaw 2824 be given first and second reading and that a public hearing be scheduled for February 15th, 2022 at 6 p.m. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Daly. Council questions? Got Councillor Pettengill and then Councillor Anderson.
Yes, thanks. Mine's actually about Class A bike parking. And I had a conversation with someone who was talking about parking options for bikes they've seen in Europe, where there's some sort of counterweight and so on. And so you can get sort of multiple levels of bike storage, but it's easy to manage. As I read our regulations, they seem to contemplate only a vertical storage or just, I guess, for lack of a better term, traditional storage. It didn't seem, as I read it, like it would accommodate some of these other things. So I guess my question is, am I incorrect in that? What would be the process of someone who wants to try some of those other options? Or is there anything we can do to make it sort of a bit less prescriptive about how they accommodate the indoor secure parking, but provide more options?
So through the mayor, there wouldn't be anything prohibiting someone from putting the type of bicycle storage that you just described in. This is just trying to be quite prescriptive about how the development is initially designed. And one of my colleagues drafted these revised bicycle parking regulations, so I'm not the expert on this piece. However, they're quite detailed to try and achieve the best possible outcome. However, there's nothing stopping someone from going in and retrofitting to add the type of bicycle parking feature that you just described.
Councillor Anderson.
Mr. Daly, I wonder whether you may be able to flip back to, I believe, your slide number 2 with the schematic of the house, and there were 2 side illustrations there. Yes, that's the one. That's the one there. Now, you have a new definition proposed for mass timber building, a building where the majority of structural members are made of wood with a minimum dimension of 96 millimeters. And one of my questions regarding that 96 millimeters and whether it covers us and whether it is enough. And the other question is what might be covered in terms of materials. So just a little bit of background. In Europe, a 96 millimeter for beam or column would actually be considered light construction. They use different grade of lumber in light timber construction. And the dimension there given is probably referring to or derived from panels. But if we look at the illustration you provided, which is a post and beam construction with glulam columns and beams, it looks like, if that's the diagram intended to illustrate our intentions with mass timber. So that number, it appears not deep. We have obviously columns and beams here much bigger than 96 millimeter. And I wonder whether we have referred to agencies or organizations interested in this question of how to define mass timber construction for zoning bylaws and building codes and this sort of thing. Related questions are whether mass or hybrid mass timber systems would be also considered, and whether heavy timber, sawn wood, would also be considered. According to the advisors to the building code, the engineers and geophysicists and the Architectural Institute of BC, they do include heavy timber as mass timber. Not everybody does. So I guess it boils down to, is that definition enough to cover what we're intending with mass timber? And has it been informed by consultation with, for example, Canadian Wood Council or FP Innovations that are very much interested in municipal bylaws and how they comply here? Where does that derive from, that definition of 96 millimeters?
Through the mayor, that definition was pulled from the City of Vancouver zoning bylaw. It was the only other zoning bylaw that I could find that had a definition for mass timber building, and given that they do pretty extensive work regarding sustainable energy and incentivizing green buildings, thought it was appropriate to pull from that definition as a starting point. I did not reach out to any of the organizations that you listed.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. Given that we're offering this incentive of a height bonus, 0.3 meters per story, I think it's actually not a small thing to consider, just to get that extra opinion, because Vancouver being leaders, they're also alone, really. And there are agencies that we might consult so that we have so we're not giving too much away, if you like, because that dimension is quite light for columns and beams, certainly. So I just would then pass on the suggestion that the Woodworks has a staff of engineers that are very much interested in what we're trying to do here is provide incentives for mass timber, and they will have some very, very experienced perspectives on what we might be able to offer in the definition. We may be okay, but they perhaps may have some suggestion, just so that we're not giving too much in terms of the incentive. Thank you.
Mr. Daly, around the Class B definition, if someone only has to provide like 3 Class B parking spots or 6, are we requiring those to be covered, or is there a minimum number? Because I would imagine if it's a small development and they don't have that many spots, I didn't see that we were sort of saying a minimum would require a cover.
I will just have to refer to the regulations here before I answer your question. That is correct. There is no minimum required. So I believe the minimum requirement for almost any most developments that would requirement is 6 Class B spaces. So that's consistent through apartment dwelling, townhouse dwelling, and non-residential units. So the idea is that the minimum that you'd have to provide is 6, and then that will have to be covered. So any new development is going to have to provide coverage over those 6 spaces.
But we don't define that. So if it's under an awning, if it's an existing part of the building, or are we imagining that this is a separate structure?
It's intentionally not defined to allow for flexibility for the development. So that could be up to the planners during the development permit process and review to look at what's being proposed and make a determination if that's adequate or not.
I know we've talked a lot about this, but we are making changes in these updates around projections into setbacks. And I've always struggled with this a bit because I always feel like the setbacks are intended to maintain privacy between lots and to prevent people sort of overlooking in the next lot. But now we're sort of saying, well, we've got these setbacks, but the balconies can overhang by this much, instead of getting people to design their buildings to avoid that. So I'm wondering why we're going in this more permissive direction versus sort of holding tight to build within the area that you have and focus on maintaining privacy between lots.
So the intention behind that was to allow for minor projections for balconies and specifically for allowing stairs and kind of landings associated with stairs providing access to buildings to project into required setbacks, because that often leads to variance applications. So we're just trying to allow this flexibility so that homeowners don't have to go through the development variance permit process to try and, add a landing that provides access to their house. And that's often required because of the flood construction level throughout town. So that's the rationale for that.
I can understand the landings and the stairwells because you don't have people lingering there. They're places that people are passing through. It's the balconies that I know we get variance requests quite frequently for balconies projecting into setbacks, but I'm not clear why that is something that we should just allow across the board.
The intention behind that is to just allow for more functional design of balconies on developments, so allow for more outdoor living space for new homes or buildings. I suppose there may be some privacy issues associated with that, but staff felt that 0.76 meters into the front, rear, interior, exterior side setback areas was a reasonable request. And that was what it was previously allowed before. It just is also clarifying that it can go into an interior side setback area, which it wasn't previously allowed to.
And then when we talk about exempting things from the height limitations, so things like elevator towers and solar panels and equipment, when developments come forward and they do their shade studies, are they required to do it just from the roof or from the top of everything they've added but is excluded from their height?
The shade studies are for the entire building. It's just when you're measuring the building height, you wouldn't take it to the top of the solar panel or whatever is exempted from height.
Okay. But when we see it, it includes the elevator tower and everything. Okay.
That's correct.
And then I noticed under personal service establishments, we've added personal training, but limited it to 2 clients at a time. But I'm curious, is that just to distinguish it from a gym per se, to keep that use out of certain areas?
That's correct.
And my other question was, in common usable open space, it looked like in the red line version that we took out minimum slope requirements and minimum size. And my fear would be that you could, when we're talking about hillside housing and lots of things going on slopes, they'd be like, well, that's the usable open space. You can't really use it because it's a giant slope, but it counts because it's green and we didn't build on it.
So it was taken out of the definition and added into the general regs section of usable open space, just because it's, not intuitive always to go and look at the definition. It's easier to look at that design regulation in the general regulations.
All right, Council, any other questions? Councillor Anderson.
Mr. Daly, some months ago when we were discussing zoning changes for the business park, and in particular the proposed then, and we did adopt an I3 zoning for the west side of Queensway, one of the things that came up in discussion was the potential interest of building supply type outlets. And what I'm curious about is how the proposed change, redefining accessory sales, that is to tighten it up to define what is a building supply outlet, how this might impact the I3 zoning. I'm afraid I didn't look it up beforehand, and I was just about to hear but does this have some impact on the I3 zone? Are building supply outlets allowed there? And why I'm asking is clearly the I3 zone is tight for, it's very competitive, and we want to preserve it for what we intend to be going on in such a zone. But I'm curious as to whether this proposed change will impact that, and to our advantage in tightening up what we consider would be a building supply outlet.
So a building supply outlet is not a permitted outright use in the I3 zone. Industrial, subject to certain restrictions, is an allowed use, and then bulk gas and fuel loading and storage facilities is also. I'm currently looking in the track changes copy, so this might not be the most updated version of the I3 zone, so I might ask my director to double check that, but I can speak to the rationale behind the amendment that you're just speaking to. So the rationale for that was that we were seeing in the southern portion of the business park in the I11 zone, building supply outlet is not a permitted use, but we've seen a number of building supply outlets trying to go into the undeveloped areas in the southern area of the business park and try and fall under light industrial by warehousing and then having an accessory retail sales. But essentially they are actually a building supply outlet. So we were trying to make this very clear that a building supply outlet is this type of use if you're warehousing home improvement materials and selling them on site. So it's just to really make it clear that that is not an appropriate use in the south end of the business park. And then I'm not sure if my director was able to look at the I3 zoning to answer that part of your question.
I'm still looking for the bylaw. It will take me a few minutes.
We can come back to that.
Thank you, Mr.
Councillor Herford?
Thank you. I'm curious about the storage space, and I appreciate the comments around this as far as not having another area that has this sort of requirement. But I feel it's quite important, given that we are often looking at parking spots that are calculated as parking spots that aren't being used as such. And I think this is an area where we could, I've seen some developers sort of acknowledge that this is an issue that will build value in their developments by sort of volunteering or putting this space in as a additional space in as a selling feature. But I really think that some work should be done there around around that, because it does have the knock-on effect to the parking and general livability of some of these spaces. So it seems that we're running into a few places where there's not a precedent, but some work could be done there. I'm curious as to, but I understand that it requires more engagement than some of these other changes. Yeah, maybe could you just expand on the rationale to exclude that at this point, and maybe if you can speculate about what would be involved in researching what would be potentially appropriate?
So through the mayor, it was, given the number of amendments in this project and the scope of it already, it was doing the public engagement was challenging to try and get buy-in and to get people to go through all of the amendments. So with that in mind, staff were trying to keep it as straightforward as possible, given the ongoing number of amendments, and thought it would be more appropriate to bring that type of amendment forward on its own or with another zoning bylaw amendment that didn't have quite as large a scope. It is going to be looked at as part of another rezoning application that was brought forward to the committee of the whole meeting last week. So that's going to get looked at with that Finch Drive rezoning application as perhaps some example of something that can work going forward in the zoning bylaw, and it certainly could be brought forward as a different amendment. But staff just wanted to try and keep the scope as tight as possible, given the large number of amendments on this.
I guess follow up to that is, so will that be considered ongoing work, or is this a standalone project that you'd like council direction on?
If I may.
Go ahead, Mr. Valnescus.
Thank you. For you, Mayor, we are anticipating that this will be part of the next zoning bylaw update. So phase 4, we already have a list of items that we will be working on as soon as phase 3 is finished. So in order to finish phase 3 essentially and start on phase 4, it would be ideal if we could delay to that phase so we can take the time to do the research and craft something that that is productive.
Okay, thank you. That's a great explanation. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't just sort of set aside as a piece that we couldn't accomplish. And I suppose similarly, I was interested in the CD zones, and I recognize that the body work there is substantial. Does staff feel that leaving the CD zones as they are and just dealing with potential rezones as we need to is the course of action, or is that piece in a similar state to this storage piece?
Through you, Mayor, the CD zones, I mean, we have, I think, 100 of them now. That is a really large piece of work to go through every zone. I think that would have to be a standalone amendment or a project, and it would be substantial.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Valnescus, do you have the answer to Councillor Anderson's question?
Yes. So that is Brian Daly was correct. I3 does not allow for building supply outlets.
Yeah, thanks. So on page 494 of the PDF of the change track, I see that we added a 2 spaces per dwelling unit parking requirement to fourplexes. And I guess I'm wondering why, and I know there's some community discussion around parking, but our CCAP, Community Climate Action Plan, talks very clearly about our imperative and ability to move away from car dependence. This seems to really entrench long-term car dependence. I know we have some upcoming parking analysis in the works. So I'm wondering why we chose to make this a requirement now as opposed to bringing these things into more alignment or seeing where those parking studies land before we add this requirement to fourplexes. Seems like a key place where we might expect it's a little easier to build in less car dependence for the long term.
Through the mayor, there was no parking requirement for fourplex dwellings defined in the zoning bylaw before, or currently there is not. So we were just trying to make sure that it was captured in the parking requirements. We were applying the 2 spaces per dwelling unit, but it wasn't in the residential parking table, or currently is not until this zoning bylaw amendment is adopted.
So I guess when I look though, accessory dwelling unit is 1 space per unit, multi-flex is 1 space, cottage cluster 1 space per dwelling unit. So I'm wondering why we chose 2 spaces given the more recent community climate action plan and some of that material, why that higher number was our choice, even if this is an interim thing.
Through the mayor, that was based off the fourplexes that have been constructed had 3 bedrooms or typically 3-bedroom units. So it was just maintaining the consistent parking requirement that is stated for townhouse dwelling units that are 3 bedrooms and apartment dwellings that have 3 bedrooms.
Would we always assume that they're going to have 3 bedrooms?
I suppose that is not a fair assumption. It was just what had been applied to current developments. So that's what was being used as a number to go off.
If I may.
Go ahead, Mr. Valnescus.
The fourplex is really akin to a townhouse in practice. Somebody could be proposing a set of townhouses in a row and calling it a fourplex. So I think that I think there is a need to review our parking standards in general, and that would probably be the appropriate place to examine whether we need to change the way we apply our parking standards. Maybe it is as it is for apartments, per bedroom rather than per dwelling unit for our townhouses, fourplexes, duplexes, and single family homes. At this point, we're just clarifying in the bylaw the fourplex situation, because if in the absence of that, it would still default per dwelling unit, which is 2 spaces per unit.
All right, anything else? So this is one of those giant bylaws that there's something that you don't like. Now is the time to try and move it or change it, because we wouldn't want someone rejecting the whole bylaw because of one clause after the public hearing. So there's a lot of changes in here, but if there's something that you really can't live with at this point, or you don't see a pathway to addressing in the future, this would be the time to discuss it, because part of the motion tonight is to set the public hearing. So just let everyone think about that. Councillor Pagango.
Yeah, I guess on the community climate action plan sort of theme again, I appreciate the change to permit electric or alternative fueling without fossil fueling. But I'm not clear with this change if there are new areas that could become fossil fuel stations, or is it kind of what we have is sort of the most we'll have? Or, is there opportunity given this change for new fossil fuel stations in Squamish?
Through the mayor, the intention behind this change was to allow for electric vehicle charging stations to occur at stations that currently provide fossil fuels. To my knowledge, there may be some undeveloped properties that are zoned for vehicle fueling stations that previously had vehicle fueling stations on them. I think it is unlikely that those would be brought back to become vehicle fueling stations, but otherwise it would require a rezoning application to have a new vehicle fueling station.
Councillor Herford.
Thank you. I think the other piece of that question that just clicked for me was, I just want to make sure we're not further complicating the installation of any electric chargers in any other locations. I understand allowing it to happen at the existing stations, but nothing in this definition further complicates what is sometimes a challenging thing of installing electric vehicle filling stations.
So electric vehicle charging station is also a separate defined use in the zoning bylaw with its own regulations in the general regulations. So it is separate from this. This is just trying to facilitate it at fossil fuel vehicles stations.
All right. So staff recommendation is 2 readings and scheduling a public hearing for the 15th. Councillor Race, you're moving that, seconded by Councillor Herford. Any comments? Councillor Pagango.
Yeah, I will be supporting this, but when I read through this, I think our parking expectations are not aligned in our bylaws with what's in our community climate action plan. And I know there's some public skepticism, but I think at some point we have to align these things. So, what's possible, what's necessary, and what our expectations are. Because right now, from my reading, our bylaw says we're planning for lots and lots and more fossil fuel vehicles for the long term, or vehicle dependence, I should say. And I don't think that's consistent with our climate policy. So I will look towards our parking review work in the next couple of years to help with that. But that is an area for me where I see a significant disconnect. But we'll allow this to proceed with the understanding we are going to do some of that deeper parking analysis.
Councillor Anderson.
Yes, in support of the resolution, I'm relieved, and I take it that Planning Department is as well, that we're going to address storage, CD zones, and as Mr. Belinskas has highlighted, a review of parking standards in general for the future. These are topics which need a different kind of exchange and engagement and discussion, say in a public hearing. I'm happy to see those topics to be put ahead for a better focused effort or review in future. That's what I have to say. Thank you.
Happy to support this resolution. I'm hoping though, when it comes back for the presentation at public hearing, if we could just get a little bit more information on sort of best practices around projections into setbacks, not so much for the doorways and landings, but that balcony piece is, because what I see is developers maximizing the density. And to do that, they push into the setbacks rather than building one less townhouse or making their project a little less dense and making it fit on the site that's there. And so, so I sort of think when you've got a lot and you've got the space to work within, why would we give you the projection? And I guess I just like to understand how other communities manage that balcony projection, or whether this is something we're doing uniquely because we just see it all the time. So that would be helpful to me. It's a one place where I get stuck, and staff and council have been sometimes on the opposite side of that question for some of the DPs that we've seen come forward. So I just want to make sure that we're really clear about why we're doing it and the benefits it provides if we're going to allow for it across the board. But otherwise, I think, Mr. Daly, you must be able to recite our zoning bylaw almost after all these minuscule changes that we're making. But I think it does add clarity overall, and look forward to seeing if there's any more comments that come forward from the public on the 15th of February. Thank you. I'll call the question, council. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Council, so we're on 8B, which is adoption. There's a number of bylaws in front of us tonight. The first is District of Squamish zoning bylaw, amendment bylaw for CD 91 38201 3rd Avenue. This is bylaw number 2563 2017. And so this is to allow the mayor and corporate officers to execute the land development agreement associated with this property as attached to the community planning. And then that the amendment bylaw for CD 91 be adopted. Councilor Rees?
Yeah. Did you wish to do them separately or together?
Be separate, yeah.
I'll move the first one.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councilor French. Any comments on this? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Someone like to move the adoption of amendment bylaw number 2563 2017? Moved by Councilor French. I'll second that. Any comments? I will call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. Next up is the adoption of the land use contract termination. This is with the Squamish Senior Citizens Housing Society, bylaw number 2621 2018. Moved by Councilor Herford, seconded by Councilor Anderson. Any comments? Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. And finally, the District of Squamish payment in lieu of off-street parking spaces, amendment bylaw number 2872 2021 be adopted. Moved by Councilor Pettengill, seconded by Councilor Herford. Any comments? Call the question. Any opposed? Motion carries. There's nothing under items 9 or 10. No, definitely 10. 10 is our consent agenda. So anything that you are in conflict with, council, or you wish to pull, now is the time to do it. Councilor Pettengill.
Yeah, the January 11th committee of the whole minutes wanted to pull, and then letters 5 and 9.
Anything else? All right, seeing none, is there someone like to move the remainder of the consent agenda? Moved by Councilor Herford, seconded by Councilor Anderson. Any opposed? Motion carries. Okay, nothing under late items, nothing under correspondence action requested. So Councillor Pettengill, letter 5 under item 13, correspondence referred from the consent agenda.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to, on the minutes from the Finch Drive discussion.
We're just dealing with the letters right now?
Oh, I apologize. So sorry, letter 5 then? Yes. So this was a letter from the minister regarding limits on what we can do in terms of speed limits in the community. I wanted to refer that to staff as I think it may be relevant to our considerations of how we manage safety and speeds. So I guess I would move that for referral to staff.
Is there a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Herford. Any further comments? Any opposed? Motion carries. And letter 9.
Yeah, I just wanted to pull this out. The staff has done a fantastic job of updating our bylaws. We saw some more updates tonight, but this one dealt with our carbon incentives and feedback from a developer about how effective those have been in getting the public to accept and actually be excited about much more efficient buildings. So kudos to staff, and I think this letter gave me a good feeling. So I just wanted to call that out, and I think I take it as a sign we're on the right track. So with that, move to receive.
I'll second that. Any further comments? Any opposed? Motion carries. We're now on approval of minutes, but do you want to speak to your January 11th Committee of the Whole, please?
Yeah, so just on this, there was 2 sections. There was a portion, and this is with regards to Finch Drive, where staff captured some of the discussion. And then in the resolution was accurately captured in terms of the items we had consensus on. But earlier in the minutes, it notes just some of the broader discussion in that there was one piece that I thought was relevant and comparable to the other items that were recorded. And that was my concern about the proximity of the affordable housing to the Fortis pipeline if it goes in. So my hope was that that just be added into the notes about the general discussion, not the resolution, but just the general discussion.
Okay, why don't you, we have the Finch Drive coming up, and so you could put a motion on the floor to amend to try and get that added? Because I don't think there was consensus broadly on that. That was certainly something you wanted to see, or you want it just included in the general comments in the minutes. Right.
Yes, yeah, it wasn't something we had consensus on.
So we just do that under business arising.
Thank you, Mary Elliott. The motion would be that the minutes of the January 11th Committee of the Whole be approved as corrected by adding the bullet. And then if there's consensus, it will be added, and if there's not, then it won't.
When someone pulls minutes from the consent agenda, is this where we should do it under 14?
I think that this makes sense.
Okay. You heard the corporate officer, Councillor Pettengill.
Yeah, so I guess I would move adoption of the minutes with the addition of the comment that there was concern raised about the proximity of the affordable housing in proximity to the Fortis pipeline if the pipeline proceeds.
Is there a seconder? You can't second your own motion.
No, I just for clarity, if I can. Just for clarity, this is not meant to be added to the resolution from the meeting, and it's not meant to be a point of consensus. It was just one of the comments that was mentioned. We had a whole series that didn't make it into the consensus piece.
Councillor Herford seconding. Any further comments? Councillor Rice?
Well, I'm not happy with that because it would be concern raised by one counselor over that, what I think be accurate. If it's just concern raised, it implies that that was consensus. So I think that needs to be clarified. So if it's a friendly amendment, I would suggest that the words be concern raised by one counselor regarding.
I can live with that. That's fine.
We have consensus on the friendly amendment. Councillor Anderson?
I will reluctantly endorse the amendment, the friendly amendment, but reluctantly for the reason that I also, as an individual councillor, brought out points that were not recorded, and one was that the community amenity contribution be directed to recreational infrastructure rather than programs. That is a lacrosse box, for example. And the other point was the Mamquam reunion channels nearby are requiring maintenance. So these are just two things I brought up. And I just think that for myself, I just think I have to learn how we work achieving consensus on these individual points. And I don't agree that the Fortis item was one of consensus on that occasion. Thank you.
For clarity, it was not added to the minutes as a consensus item. The items we were asked to comment on were density and unit mix, apartment building height, parking, community amenity contribution offer, and affordable housing proposal. So if you would like your comments to stand, Councillor Anderson, around the community amenity contribution, then you should also put a motion forward to amend the minutes, because that was one of the consensus items staff was looking for. Merely, Councillor Pettengill wanted to just make sure his comment was captured in the general minutes overall. So that motion's on the floor. I'll call the question. Are there any opposed? Motion carries. All right. We have recommended motions from January 11th Committee of the Whole that the Garibaldi Estates Neighborhood Plan Stage 2 Engagement Summary be received with the following comments that are listed in the agenda, and that the staff engage at the beginning of Stage 3 with Garibaldi Estates residents and community stakeholders to better understand concerns and opportunities in the neighborhood planning process prior to moving on to scenario development. Moved by Councillor French, second by Councillor Herford. Any comments? Any opposed? Motion carries. That the District of Squamish received the one-year review of the short-term rental regulatory program dated January. Just trying to throw me off there. Dated January 11th for information, and that council directs staff to proceed in early 2022 with a call for temporary use permit applications for up to 18 short-term rental TUPs. Moved by Councillor Anderson, seconded by Councillor Herford. Any comments? Any opposed? Motion carries. District of Squamish, that council received the Upper Finch Drive rezoning report for information. We did provide feedback on density and unit mix, apartment building height, parking, community amenity contribution offer, affordable housing proposal, and that council directs staff to work with the applicant to resolve any comments provided by council prior to consideration of first reading. Moved by Councillor Herford, seconded by Councillor French. Councillor Herford?
Yes, thank you. I was trying to figure out where to put this bit, but earlier in the Loggers East sub-area planning process, I declared a conflict as I had a business conflict with a different development, and I just wanted to state that that's no longer exists, that conflict. So that's a separate property, a separate issue. And having said that, I'll move this one.
I did that. Okay, you're trying to trick me there. Councillor French seconded it. Any further comments? And thank you for clearing that up. That will be on the record. So that's great. Any opposed? Motion carries. And that District of Squamish send a generic letter of support reiterating the need for broadband infrastructure and improved connectivity to Paradise Valley for the TELUS application. Moved by Councillor Reese, seconded by Councillor Anderson. Any comments? Any opposed? Motion carries. Any business arising from the minutes? We do not have anything under items 16 or 17. No unscheduled public attendance. Open question period. Anyone online? Harley? No. Councilor staff announcements. Anything this evening? 2022 is off to a more mellow start. We've done our closed meeting. Motion to terminate. By Councilor Herford, second by Councilor Race. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, staff. Thank you, council. Have a good evening.